today's webinar, Everything You Need to Know About Your Employee Handbook, presented by our sponsor, Heffernan. We're very happy you can join us today. My name is Michelle Wilcox, and I will be your moderator, and I will also be monitoring questions you may have during the session. Before we open up the session, let's review a couple of key items. All of the webinar materials we discuss can be found at the URL currently showing on your screen. I will be sharing this URL in a follow-up email, so don't feel like you need to write it down right now. If you have trouble with your internet connection during the webinar, we recommend leaving the presentation and logging back in. We do not control the audio, your devices do. So if you have difficulties, try adjusting the volume settings on your device. If a telephone line goes down during the call, hang up and call back again to the same number. If all lines go dead, watch the on-screen chat box for an alternative call-in number. Feel free to ask questions or provide feedback by using the chat box or questions box during the webinar. If you're using a tablet, you may need to tap on the screen for the options bar to appear. Then you can select the appropriate option. We may respond immediately, but we will work your questions or feedback into the presentation. If we can't get to your comment or question during the session, we will be online afterwards to respond, or we may follow up in an email if we run completely out of time. You may also email us at moderator@aspenrmg.com for up to 48 hours after the webinar. This will be a 1-hour presentation. Comments and questions are very much encouraged throughout, and the presenter will be answering questions at the end. Lastly, we have a number of upcoming webinars covering a variety of topics, including those listed at the Heffernan webinar website. With that, let's begin today's webinar, Everything You Need to Know About Your Employee Handbook. I'm going to go ahead and switch the presentation over, but our presenter today is Deb Beto. Deb Beto is a senior professional in human resources, SPHR, and her professional experience spans over 30 years. 12 years ago, she founded her company called Your Ops Manager that manages the business operations of small businesses, including all the elements of human resources. As an advisor to companies of less than 50 employees, Deb has been advising employers about their HR side of safety since 2010. I'll let you take it over, Deb.
Thank you, Michelle. And Michelle, your voice is breaking up just a little bit, and I'm not sure if that is my internet or not. So if my voice is breaking up, please don't hesitate to interrupt me, and I will switch my microphones.
Okay,
so thank you. And thank everyone for attending today's presentation on the employee handbook do's and don'ts. We will be taking a look at everything that should be included in a handbook, but also what should not be included in a handbook. And just a quick disclaimer, the information I'm going to be presenting today is general in nature and is intended to present an overview of employment practices. The written and verbal contents of the presentation are not intended to constitute consulting or advice, and no client relationship is established between the presenter, myself, and the attendees during this presentation. So now that we have got that legalese out of the way, I will introduce myself and reiterate what Michelle already told you, that I do have quite a bit of experience in human resources, both in my own company and with previous employers. I'm happy I can share my expertise with you today and give you some insight into employee handbook best practices. Writing employee handbooks is a project that we take on for many of our clients on an annual basis. So I'm just at the tail end of doing all of my updates for the new laws that have been introduced in 2026. So not only do I have a great history of this work, but I also have some very recent history that I will be looking forward to sharing with you. This is our agenda for today, and I will be taking questions at the end. So jot them down as you go along. You can put your questions in the questions box. Michelle will keep track of those, and we'll take questions at the end of the presentation. So let's start with some fun facts about employee absenteeism. So number one, Monday is the absence. The number one is a Monday absence rule. Mondays account for the highest absenteeism, which is 15 to 20% higher in unscheduled absences compared to midweek days like Wednesday. And post-weekend slump is a real phenomenon. And you probably just experienced a little bit of that at your companies because Super Bowl Sunday is a big cause for absenteeism on Monday.
Deb, I don't mean to interrupt you, but yeah, you are cutting in and out. So
Okay, let me dial in real quick and then I will be right back with you.
thank you. Sorry for that, folks. Technology is a love-hate relationship. So we'll just give her a second to dial in.
Okay, how are we now?
You got an echo now.
I
Uh-oh.
sure do. Okay, hold on. I know what's causing that.
Technical difficulties. Gotta love them, hate them. Yes.
Okay, hold on. I know it's causing this.
I'll shut up until I get it fixed. Hang in there, guys.
The problem is that I'm on both the computer and I don't know how to get off of go to webinar though without hanging up. Michelle, I'm going to have to take back the presenter for a second.
Yes. Okay.
And now I should be able to hang up. There we go. How's that?
Okay, you sound far away.
Okay, and how is that?
Oh my goodness, you're back. Thank you.
Okay. So sorry, everyone. We don't necessarily have control over that all the time. So, all righty. So, as I just mentioned, Super Bowl Monday, the day after Super Bowl, is practically an unofficial holiday in the United States. In 2023, 17 million Americans called out sick or skipped work entirely after the big game, and some employers even call it the Super Bowl flu. And speaking of flu season really does hit hard. The CDC reports that the flu leads to about 9 million lost workdays annually in the U.S., peaking between November and February. And this costs employers roughly $10.4 billion in direct expenses like medical costs and lost productivity. And snow days aren't just for kids. Weather-related absences spike in the wintertime, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics estimates that absences rise about 12% during major snowstorms, especially in regions like the Northeast and the Midwest. Mental health issues are on the rise. A 2023 LinkedIn survey found that 68% of U.S. workers have taken a mental health day, though many still mask it as a physical illness. And this reflects a growing trend as mental health awareness increases. Number 6 is allergy season. Coming up, guys, get ready for it. Seasonal allergies cause an estimated 3.6 million lost work days every year. Spring and fall see noticeable dips in attendance, and that would be April and May, and also September and October. Those are the months that are most effective. Number 7, the pet excuse trend. A career builder survey found that about 23% of the respondents have used pet-related excuses for absences. And so you might hear things like, my cat is stuck in the blinds, or my dog ran away this morning, and it makes it a surprisingly popular alibi for not showing up for work. And number 8 has had a lot of news lately, the sick while present phenomenon. It's called presenteeism, which means showing up to work sick, and it's a big deal in the USA today. a 2021 study found that 60% of employees admitted to working while ill, which cost employers $150 billion annually in reduced productivity, sometimes leading to more absences later because they get their coworkers sick or they get even more sick themselves. Number 9, vacation guilt skips. Employees are notorious for not using all of their paid time off, and they leave an average of about 4.6 vacation days unused every year. Yet, unscheduled absences still hit 5.5% of work hours monthly, suggesting that burnout might sneak in anyway. So encourage your employees to take their vacations. And number 10, the costly sick calls. Unplanned absences cost U.S. employers about $2,650 per employee annually. And that adds up to almost $600 billion across the workforce, with industries like healthcare and retail hit the hardest. Employee absenteeism can hurt your organization, so it's essential to resolve it as soon as it occurs. An employee handbook will provide employees expectations and clarify what course of action the employer will take. So enough of our fun facts. Bad behaviors in the workplace decrease productivity. They hurt morale and they may cost the company business. So whether you're dealing with a minor problem such as the chronic lateness or something major like falsifying financial reports, prompt attention to these matters is key. An employee handbook should establish a standard for behavior and set the expectations for employees to follow. When someone ignores the standards, the employer is able to follow a course of action and follows a strict discipline procedure to help correct the situation. So it gives the managers a roadmap for how they can handle bad behavior in an impartial way across the board. So let's go through a few oddball situations that I've uncovered. Number 1, the lunch thief. Stealing a coworker's lunch out of the refrigerator is a common phenomenon in about 20% of employers. And this petty crime wave leads many companies to add food theft clauses to their handbooks, and sometimes with warnings about disciplinary action over a missing sandwich. And I'm laughing because in our staff meeting this morning, we just talked about some situations on the show The Office, and the lunch thief was one theme in one of the Office episodes. And so I'm laughing at how The Office really can be a humorous look at real life. The number 2 is the bathroom bandit. Where is it? The bathroom bandit. Some companies add policies about reasonable restroom use to curb the behavior of taking bathroom breaks up to 2 hours a day. Some employees have even been caught hoarding toilet paper from their employers. Well, hopefully our TP hoarding days are behind us by now, and we can take this out of our presentation in the next few years. But post-COVID, I think we all saw a lot of TP theft from the office. Number 3, the pajama problem. With remote work surging after 2020 during COVID, speaking of COVID, employers have experienced employees joining video calls in their pajamas or sometimes even less clothing than that. Employers have responded by updating dress codes, policies to include camera-ready attire, even though for those working from home. Number 4, office romance gone wrong. A 2023 Career Builder survey revealed that 31% of U.S. workers have dated a colleague, with 6% sparking complaints to the HR department. This led to consensual relationship agreements, or love contracts, popping up in handbooks to manage workplace PDA and bad breakups, even worse. Number 5, social media etiquette. Employees live tweeting company secrets or ranting about bosses online became such a headache that in 2020, the National Labor Relations Board issued a ruling that prompted firms to add social media policies to their handbooks. There was one infamous case in which a worker was fired for posting a meme that called their manager a toad. And because of that meme, handbooks now often ban disparaging posts. But this is also coming up against the First Amendment, which is freedom of speech. So we have to be careful about how this is addressed in an employee handbook. Nap time. While power naps boost productivity, some employees take it a bit too far, sometimes napping under their desks for several hours a day. If this is a problem in your office, clarify what power naps are. They're 15 to 30 minutes and not a hibernation. Pets in the workplace. Post-pandemic employees have been bringing their pets to work unannounced, so companies have had to incorporate policies about pet-free workplace rules unless pets are explicitly allowed in the workplace. So if you allowed that behavior during the pandemic, it might be time to change your policy. Number 8 is a familiar one in my world. I call it microwave misadventures. Burnt popcorn and fishy odors have sparked office wars, so a lot of companies have incorporated microwave etiquette policies into their employee handbooks. We had a burnt popcorn situation in our office that didn't prompt an update to our handbook, but it did prompt some discussions among the employees for sure. We all got on the same page. All right, number 9, excessive swearing or even swearing at all should not be allowed in the workplace. Some people that hear profanity at work might not be willing to speak up if it makes them uncomfortable, especially if it seems to be an accepted practice. So this leads to morale issues, productivity issues, and could result in a hostile workplace lawsuit. Many companies are specifying professional language expectations in their handbook. And the last one, inappropriate use of company property. The biggest culprit of this is using work time and computer equipment to shop online, watch movies, post videos on social media, or even setting up businesses like fantasy football leagues or Etsy shops. One employee in Kentucky took over a room in the warehouse to set up a moonshine operation. And an employee in Colorado invited her friends for free workout classes after the gym closed every night, leaving dirty towels for the morning crew. And then also in California, there was a movie clerk that had his friends come in for popcorn, candy, and soda after hours. Employers should not have to define common sense in their handbooks, but here are 10 examples that show that common sense is not always common. And that brings us to our first question. Do you have an employee handbook or written policies? So Michelle, take over.
So the options are A, employee, you have a handbook, written policies, or nothing in writing. And I'll go ahead and launch the poll and give everybody a few seconds to cast their votes. And thank you again for you guys' attendance today. We appreciate it. And I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. It's like 94% have employee handbooks.
Awesome. Well, employee handbooks are a great reference tool for company policies and also legal requirements. At a very minimum, your handbook should include all of the state and federal labor laws. Spoiler alert, if you have your labor law posters hanging up in your workplace, like in your lunchroom or something, those are all of the state and federal labor laws you need to keep your employees informed about. So just having the poster hanging up meets that requirement. You don't need a handbook if you don't have any other policies outside of those posters. But if you choose to also have an employee handbook, you do need to also have all of those state and federal laws in your employee handbook, even though they're already hanging in the lunchroom. So you're already meeting federal and state requirements by hanging up your posters. The best reason to have an employee handbook is to relate all of the policies that are specific to your company. This is your opportunity to establish your company culture and communicate your company values.
What you should not do is get policies confused with procedures. Your handbooks should communicate policies that should not change very often, if ever. It just confuses employees when policies change. Your procedures and how-tos, on the other hand, probably change quite frequently. If you log into a website today, it might look completely different a month from now. And so that procedure is going to look different a month from now. Your procedures and how-tos should be a different resource. Procedures do change as efficiencies improve, as software is updated, as different skill sets come into the workplace. So don't confuse procedures with policies. Your handbook is your policies. So this detailed how-tos is what I call standard operating procedures, or SOPs. So the procedures is an SOP. And this is a whole other possible topic for a future webinar. There are various resources that employers could develop for their employees. An operations manual that defines your day-to-day processes and procedures is very common in the workplace, and is something that you could consider having as a resource in addition to your employee handbook. A supervisor's manual is a guideline for supervisors to use as a resource for them to use in their role as a supervisor. And this helps new supervisors who've been promoted from within to understand how their role changes by becoming a supervisor. For example, the training that they have to have for preventing sexual harassment, or how to handle situations that involve bullying. It generally includes a lot of information that helps supervisors understand their supervisory responsibilities. If you wanted to put that into a written format, you would have a supervisor manual as well as an employee handbook, and possibly as well as a procedure guide. So what the employee handbook should be is a reference for employees to understand the company culture, the values, and the framework for policies such as codes of conduct, work hours, attendance, dress code, breaks and meals, use of company equipment, tolerance or intolerance about drug use and smoking, and any other policies that the company wants clearly communicated. They are company-specific standards that should not change often, if at all, whether by law or not, that the company expects their employees to adhere to, regardless of any changes in personnel. The policy should not change unless new laws come into effect that would require that change, or if policies have been abused by employees and therefore the policies need to be updated. So let's move on to a second polling question. I'll let you ask the question this time, Michelle.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry. Have you trained managers on your harassment policy? Yes, no, or we don't have a policy? I'll give it a couple seconds here.
And is my audio still good?
Yes, it is. So
Okay.
I'm going to close the poll. We've got 71% that say yes, 20% say no.
Okay, well, we're going to move on to some of the most important policies that your handbook should contain. So California law says that supervisors who are new to the company or new to their supervisory status need to go through preventing harassment training within 6 months of being assigned to their supervisory position. And this applies to companies that have 5 or more employees. I have seen some companies introduce the harassment policy to new employees during the onboarding process, but my recommendation is to not do it during the onboarding process, and instead do it during the first week as the employee is getting used to their new employment status. If they're already going through enough on their first day to introduce employees are drinking through the fire hose on the first day. So to introduce a policy as important as anti-harassment and anti-bullying is just not considered best practice. If you're going to do it as an onboarding process, do it during the first week, not the first day. Make sure your supervisors know that reviewing this policy with new employees during the first week of employment is a really good start to establishing good expectations about good workplace behavior towards coworkers. Most managers are anxious to get their new employees started with tasks and duties, but it's a good idea to have an opportunity to review the handbook so that the employee understands what the expectations are aside from the job description. So going through the preventing harassment policies specifically gives new employees insight into what constitutes harassment and quid pro quo. It also confirms that the policy is circulated and understood and reinforces the policies with the supervisors who are actually training the policies. And remember, you are training on the policies that you are offering, and what you're offering, if anybody has a complaint, is a timely investigation and not an immediate investigation. These policies that are outlined in your manual should also provide examples in the manual itself of what constitutes harassment and what constitutes quid pro quo to help the employees to recognize that type of behavior. One good reference point would be that if your company has had to have discussions with employees about improper behavior, updating your employee manual with examples of that behavior, not people's names, obviously, but examples of the behavior that is unwanted, would go further to exemplify the types of situations that you are not going to tolerate in your workplace. And starting this conversation early on in an employee's employment with the company will make sure that the employee does not feel unsafe about discussing harassment or bullying in the workplace. They have a supervisor that they can talk with about this. And I don't mean for this to be a sales pitch, but if your company needs preventing harassment training for supervisors, I believe Heffernan has harassment training coming up this year. The 2-hour presentation is too much to boil down to essentials during our presentation today, but this slide tries to do the job with some practical things that a company should do. So, do outline the procedure for reporting and addressing harassment. Do inform the employee about who will manage the claim and give them multiple choices for who to contact. Give them options for both written and verbal reporting procedures, and give them outside resources if they're not getting anywhere with resources inside the company. And also discuss the disciplinary consequences of exhibiting harassment towards coworkers. Another policy that's important for your employee handbook is to have your company's drug and alcohol policy in there. Zero tolerance policies are popular in office environments, but they're not always practical. Especially if you're a bar or a restaurant or a medical marijuana retailer that has a zero tolerance policy would not be that practical. But it makes it even more important for employees to understand what the company is towards drugs and alcohol. Zero tolerance is pretty easy to understand. It's the gray areas that need policies. The zero tolerance policy does not address legal drugs that may impair an employee's ability to do their job. Also, some companies find it acceptable to have a drink or glass of wine when dining with a client or other business associate. Having a policy for what's acceptable, having a drink or a glass of wine, and what's not acceptable, getting drunk or inebriated to the point where you can't drive, for an employee to understand what is tolerated in the workplace is extremely important. And now that medical and recreational marijuana is legal in many states, how does your company specifically want to address that subject? The drug and alcohol policies for your organization should be committed to providing a safe and productive working environment for all employees, as well as the public that comes into your workplace. Prescription medication policies should be very clear, and that even if you're on a prescription medication, you need to be able to safely and productively do your job while you're on that prescribed medication. If you want a policy for testing drugs or alcohol, the policy needs to specify the reason for the testing and what the consequences will be if the results are positive. Be careful when you're putting together a drug testing policy, because you need to make sure that it's not discriminatory in any way. There's been a lot of cases of drug testing policies becoming discrimination lawsuits. So let's go on to polling question number 3.
Do you have a policy stating employees have no expectation of privacy? Yes or no? I went ahead and launched the poll. Give it a second here. Give people time. Thank you again for participating. We appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. It's 46% say yes, 51% say no.
Okay. Well, for those of you that do not have a policy expressly stating that employees have no expectation of privacy, you will want to go back and revise your handbooks. So this is the majority of you, actually. Employees need to understand that using the company's equipment and the company's time means that the company has the right to know how the employees are using that equipment and their time. The company has every right to inspect or retrieve any information, to take a look at how time is spent and how communication is actually taking place. Specifically, when an employee is sending personal emails or surfing the internet on a company computer, all of that is subject to no privacy for the employee, and they should have that expectation that there is no privacy. There should also be a communication policy in your employee handbook, and this slide specifically addresses the electronic communication policy. Anything that has to do with computers, cell phones, telephones, or other office communication equipment. And aside from saying that employees do not have any expectation of privacy, there needs to be a clause to address the employee's right to what's called concerted activity. What that means is specifically addressing your employee's ability to discuss any kinds of terms or conditions of employment or pay or any other working conditions. Your employees have a right to discuss those things or anything else that may cause employees to decide to unionize. But the employer can have policies that allow for the employee to have these discussions with management to try to avoid a concerted activity with other employees getting involved. Also, using company equipment and electronics solely for that purpose cannot be obstructed. You will want to refer to how the NLRB wants you to have this addressed in your handbook if you think that's going to be an issue for you. It's okay to have rules about online activity. You will want to make sure that they're not too rigid, but also not too general. You don't want to rigidly restrict activities in the workplace. The activities should be allowed during breaks, lunch periods, and time that the employee is on their own, not on the company clock. You also don't want to be too general about what an employee can and can't say about the company on social media. They should not be able to say anything that is untrue or express an opinion and represent that it is the company's opinion, but you can't have a policy that simply only says nice things. That's too general, and it does not comply with the First Amendment. Your handbook should consider personal privacy versus company concerns. So when it comes to GPS on vehicles or phones or timekeeping applications, we want to make sure that our policies address those privacy issues. We also want to have rules for remote workers and their online security. And there also needs to be a policy on the use of personal versus company cell phones. You want to make sure that your handbook explains all of the expectations that you as the employer have related regarding these communication devices. Okay, I'm going to take a sip of water while Michelle dives into number 4.
Next question, what type of disciplinary procedure do you have? Is it discretionary, progressive, or you don't know the difference? And open the polls. We'll let some people, again, thank you for participating. We appreciate it. All right, so we've got 45% that say progressive.
Ooh.
27 discretionary.
Okay. Okay, good. Handbooks generally should have a disciplinary policy. I will say that if you use a discretionary policy, It doesn't necessarily need to be in the handbook, but if you use a progressive policy, it should definitely be in the handbook. A discretionary disciplinary policy, for those that might not know the difference, is more flexible in the approach for how to handle employee misconduct or poor performance. And a progressive policy is a very structured approach for how to handle employee misconduct or poor performance. And a discretionary policy gives management the freedom to decide how to handle rule breaking or underperformance on a case-by-case basis. There's no set playbook. The consequences depend on the situation, the employee, and the supervisor's judgment. But a progressive disciplinary policy is a structured, step-by-step approach where discipline escalates with each infraction. And it most often starts with a verbal warning, and then a written warning, and then a performance improvement plan, and finally termination. But whatever type of policy you put in your handbook, it must be consistently applied to every disciplinary situation. This is really important in making sure that your company does not face any discrimination lawsuits. Make sure that the policy includes the language that says, includes but is not limited to, when it comes to the types of behaviors that warrant disciplinary action. You don't want to make it appear that you've listed every behavior that might cause discipline. It will be impossible for you to list everything. You need to give yourself room for other scenarios. Also, use language that says violations may lead to disciplinary action up to and including termination. This is especially important when using a progressive disciplinary policy. You, as the employer, don't want to be held so accountable to your progressions that you can't immediately terminate an employee who threatens another employee's life, for example. And remember that your employee handbook is not the place for how-to. This policy manual should describe whether the employer uses a discretionary policy or a progressive policy, and how a progressive policy progresses from a high level, not an instructional how-to level. Time off policies. It's also important to have a section in your employee handbook that addresses your company's specific time off policies. Some companies have paid time off, some companies have unpaid time off, some companies have separate sick leave and vacation leave policies, and some companies combine those policies into one PTO policy. Some companies give paid holidays, while other companies are just closed for business and provide their employees with unpaid holidays. And some time off policies are required by law, depending on how many employees you have. Most states will also have different laws as well. If you employ workers in different states, you will want to make sure that you're complying with state laws for each state that you have employees. So, for example, some states have paid jury leave, some states have unpaid jury leave. And most of the time off that is required by law has to do with family medical leave laws, whether that's FMLA, the federal law on a federal level, or state laws like CFRA in California. So the California Family Rights Act governs the state laws in California. Your handbook should also define your company probationary or introductory period. You want to tell employees how long the introductory or probationary period is and what changes after the probationary period is over. Most companies that have a probationary period have a 90-day probationary period in which the employee is not eligible for benefits like sick leave, health insurance, or PTO, but it could also include things like tardiness, performance, or bonus eligibility. And it doesn't have to be 90 days. It can be shorter or longer. This is a completely discretionary period according to the employer's necessities. But if you do have a probationary period, you also want to include a statement that allows the company to extend the introductory period or probationary period. This might allow for situations where you knew you were hiring employees that had a prearranged three-week vacation that you were allowed for. And you might want to have the ability to extend that period another 3 weeks to make up for the 3 weeks that they weren't there during their vacation and give you the appropriate evaluation time. There could be any number of reasons that you would want to extend an introductory period. Another example might be if an employee is supposed to get a license for something and for some reason it was delayed beyond their control. Whatever the reason might be, you just want to make sure that the language is in there to allow for it. And this is a really good opportunity to keep in mind that the employee handbook is not just rules for the employee. It also holds the employer accountable. So don't put things in your handbook that you're not going to want to be held accountable for. For example, don't say you'll follow up at the end of the probationary period if you don't have any practice of doing that. Don't put anything in your employee handbook that you specifically don't want to be held accountable to. That's a really good way of getting your entire employee handbook thrown out in court in the event of a lawsuit. How can the employee be expected to adhere to the policies if the employer doesn't even adhere to the policies? Okay, Michelle.
Question number 5. Does your handbook explain when your employees are paid? Yes, no, or not sure what that means? Give it a second here. And we've got 100% yes. So I'm going to close it,
Nice.
share it.
Well, we are running a little bit behind, so maybe I should just skip this whole slide, but I won't. Here, I'll just try to speed it up. Your handbook should cover information about how the work week is defined, what the working hours are, when overtime begins for non-exempt employees, when the pay dates are, what is the pay frequency, and what period of time does each payday cover. For example, if a company has paydays on the 15th and the last day of the month, what time periods do the 15th and the last day of the month cover? A lot of companies say the 15th covers the 26th of the previous month through the 10th of this month, and then the last day of this month covers the 11th through the 25th of this month. But that might not be the policy in your company. Be specific about the pay periods that a paycheck covers and when that paycheck is expected to be available to the employees. And don't make the mistake of presenting paychecks on any other day than what you've stated. Obviously, a late paycheck is a serious infraction, but also paying employees early sets a dangerous precedent. And if you don't do it for everyone, it could bring up a discrimination lawsuit. The only expectations might be when a payday falls on a weekend or a holiday, and those exceptions should be spelled out in the policy. It might be paid out on the Friday before, or it might be paid out on the first business day after, but whatever it is, the expectations need to be identified, and the pay dates for those expectations need to be defined and adhered to. Again, if the employer is not being adhered to the policies, then how could the employees be adhered to the policies? Minutes count. Other exceptions might include grace periods when using clocking systems. Are they allowed to clock in early or late? How early or how late? 5 minutes? 10 minutes? Normally, grace periods are allowed because employees forget to clock in or out. So how is the situation handled when the employee is not at work? The policies around grace periods should be spelled out in the handbook. Rounding issues need to be addressed in the policies too. Basically, the policy should be very clear about how the employee will get paid from the minute they start work to the minute they stop work. And if there's off the clock work allowed, there should be a policy for that. If they're taking a minute from home to acknowledge an email or waiting for their computer to boot up before they can get on the time clock, these increments of time that are too small or trivial to track is called de minimis time. This comes from a Latin phrase meaning the law does not concern itself with trifles. It allows an employer to not have to pay for every second of an employee's time if it's impractical to measure. But be careful with that definition though, because while the federal laws recognize that definition, some state laws do not, including California. California requires employers to pay for de minimis time, and we've seen some lawsuits regarding that in the last 5 years. Some different states have different laws regarding meal and rest breaks as well. So make sure that you understand the laws for your specific state and the states that your employees are located. And once you understand those laws, you will know what to include in your handbook. In California, employees should be paid for a 10-minute rest period for every 4 hours worked or a fraction thereof. Now, 10-minute rest period, paid rest period. I want to make that clear to everyone. Employers should define when the meals and rest breaks should be, how long should they be, and how to schedule with respect to other employees. Rest breaks are paid and meal breaks are unpaid. An example policy might read, meal breaks are unpaid, uninterrupted, and duty-free for a maximum of 30 minutes after working no more than 5 hours. One sentence, but pretty darn clear. You want to make sure that your employee handbook includes language about free speech. You want your employees to be able to talk to you about whatever kind of complaints they have, especially with respect to things like their wage or salary or terms and conditions of employment. And you don't have to call it free speech. Some employers call it an open door policy. You just want to make sure that employees don't feel banned from coming to you as their employer to talk about these issues. And while the employee handbooks may address some of these issues, a lot of times the employees might just feel the need to talk it through with somebody at the level of management. If your place of employment has unions, you want to make sure that you have opportunities for union representatives to speak with you as well, or that employees have the ability to speak with their union representatives. And we talked a little bit earlier about different types of paid and unpaid time off. Federal and state allowances for leaves of absence should be included in your handbook. Different types of leave are available to employees depending on the number of employees that are in your organization, and most of the leaves revolve around family leave. Employees are going to want to know what types of leaves they're entitled to, how long those leaves might be, whether the leaves are paid or unpaid, whether their job is protected or not protected, how to coordinate the leave between their medical providers and their employers, how their insurance is handled while they're on leave, who pays their insurance while they're on leave, how their paid time off accruals are handled while they're on leave, the type of communication they're expected to have with their employer while they're on leave, what happens to their company property on leave. You may want to take possession of the equipment so that there's a clear expectation that they're not supposed to work while on leave. And the other thing to cover is how the return to work is coordinated. A lot of times a doctor's note is required saying that they're able to return to work with a list of restrictions if there are any. All of this should be explained in your employee handbook. Your employees should not have to guess at how these life-changing events are going to affect their work. So Michelle, let's
And the next poll, do you have offsite employees? Yes or no? We're going to scoot this along. I've launched the poll. And give it 1 second here, and it looks like it's about 50-50, Deb.
Oh boy, I thought I would be able to skip this section now that everybody's getting back to work, but I'm going to leave this section in. So field employees. After COVID, a lot of employees started working remotely, but some employers have also have field employees that never worked remotely, like construction workers. So it's important that when you have a remote or off-site employee, that they have a way to access all of the same company policies as your on-site employees do. If you do have off-site employees, you may have to include other policies, such as driving policies, that maybe other policies that might include company equipment and keeping them locked in vehicles, or carpooling arrangements that the employer might be encouraging. But most importantly, you want to make sure that off-site employees have access to all of the policy information and that they're being held to the same standards as on-site employees. This not only applies to the employee handbook, but it also applies to the legal postings that are typically posted in the lunchroom or break room of the office. Field employees have to access those same postings. There's a law about that. If there's no place like a shop that the field employees typically gather, then you'll want to make copies of the postings and keep copies in the vehicles that the employees use. If you have some employees that work remotely and others that don't, you will definitely want to have a policy that identifies who's eligible to work from home and who's not, and why. You don't want to get into a situation that feels discriminatory to any of your employees. Remote employees need to understand the policies related to remote work. So lots of questions come up. How are hours going to be tracked? How is company information going to be accessed? How should they easily communicate with supervisors and coworkers? How frequently should they check in with their supervisor? Will they be required to attend a regular staff meeting in person or remotely? What furniture and equipment is company provided versus what the employee should provide? A lot of times company provided furniture is too big or inappropriate for their home, and it might be better if they provide the furniture. What is the company providing a stipend for their home internet? What are the safety and ergonomic protocols that should be followed even though they're in their own home? You can specify what type of desk or chair or ergonomic equipment is required in order to avoid a workers' compensation claim. If they use their kitchen stool instead of the equipment you specify, then they may not be able to make that workers' compensation claim for their back injury. What type of injuries does the workers' compensation insurance not cover in a home office? That's important for you to know. And you definitely want to have the ability to rescind the approval. There's a new trend for employers to be bringing employees back to work. So it's not that new, but there is a trend going on. So you need to make sure that this easily rescindable policy gives you, the company, more options and establishes the expectation with the employees from the start that it could be rescinded at any time. Some employees took the opportunity to work from home as an opportunity to move out of the state. So if that's the case in your situation, you will want to make sure that your company is complying with the state and local laws in which the employee is located. Health and safety is an important section to have addressed in your handbook. This applies to both remote and on-site employees. Give suggestions for avoiding heat illness, give suggestions for avoiding ergonomic injuries, reference your state laws regarding smoking in the workplace, and include that in your handbook. For employees who drive company vehicles or their own vehicles for work purposes, you should have policies that establish the expectations for safety. They're required to follow all traffic laws, for example. They have to use hands-free technology for their cell phones while they're driving. Another example is that they're responsible for any type of traffic violations or parking tickets. If they're in an accident, what does that process look like? If company property was stolen from their vehicle or was damaged due to the excessive heat in their vehicle, make sure that there's a good understanding of the expectations of employee responsibility in these cases that could include discipline up to and including termination. Dress code is a recommended policy for the handbook, not a required policy, but you want to make sure that there are no discriminatory biases. Policies should be about business safety concerns. You cannot have separate policies for different genders, like men not being able to have long hair. You can state that hair has to be tied back for safety purposes, but not that long hair has anything to do with gender. You also don't want to ban specific clothing that might be religious in nature, like turbans or hijabs, unless it imposes a safety issue. There are also grooming issues that teeter on religion, like beards. Keep grooming policies related to good hygiene standards. Employers in the U.S. can have policies against tattoos and piercings, but the legality and enforceability depend on the nature of the policy, how it's applied, and where you are. Like California and Massachusetts, you might not be so lucky to have a policy like that if you needed one. The policies have to apply in general and not to specific gender. It also can't discriminate on race or religion, such as Polynesian cultures where tattoos are tied to the culture, or a Sikh who has ceremonial markings. You can also have a no visible tattoos policy if it's for a job-related reason. And bottom line is that you will want to understand what the laws are in your state and compare the laws to the policies that the company wants to enforce to make sure the company policies are within the law. If you have uniforms, you have to make sure that you specify how those uniforms are supposed to be taken care of. Do they need to be ironed? Do they need to go to the dry cleaner? Do uniforms need to be worn at all times? Whatever your uniform policies are need to be included in your dress code policy. You also want to make sure that your employee handbook has some specific disclaimers. There has to be a disclaimer that the handbook is intended to be a guideline, very clearly not a contract. If the handbook looks like a contract, then it could negate any at-will employment policy that the employer has. There should also be a disclaimer that the handbook may be revised at the company's discretion. Best practice is to review your entire employee handbook on an annual basis when the new laws come out, but you should try to do a complete review at least every 2 to 3 years. Sometimes on an annual basis, it's expensive and it may not be necessary. Maybe the new laws don't apply to your company, or maybe there's only one law that has a change. If you want to save some money, you can do an addendum for that particular section and then make sure that the rewrite of the section is done the next time you do a full manual review. And a good example would be the discrimination laws as it relates to natural hairstyles in California. You could revise that one policy that came into effect in the last couple of years in an addendum instead of having to revise the whole handbook. Get your employees to sign an acknowledgement of any addendums that you do issue, however. If your handbooks are translated into another language, you do have an additional disclaimer to specify that the English version is the controlling version if there are any disputes related to the translation. Okay, Michelle, we've got about
Okay,
8
how
left.
often, I know, how often do you review your employee handbook? Every year, every 2 years, every 3 years? It needs to be reviewed. So we'll give it a second. I know we are running on time, and unfortunately that was part of our technical difficulty. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and close the polls. It looks like 50% say every year,
Oh,
15% say every 2 and every 3.
okay. I'm going to speed through some of these translations. If 10% or more of your workforce speak another language, then all of the critical policies that are in your handbook need to be translated. So it's very expensive to translate, but much less expensive than a misunderstanding that results in a lawsuit or a fine. And finally, we get to signing off. You do want to make sure, that means we're getting to the end here. You do want to make sure that you have a signature for the entire handbook, as well as signatures for each of the addendums that you may have issued since distributing the handbook. You need a separate receipt that you can file in their employee file, not a signed page that stays within the handbook. And it's best practice to provide training when there's something new or updated. When the training occurs, get a signed acknowledgement that the training took place and that they were in attendance. What you don't want to do is just distribute the handbook and assume that the employees read it. And even if they did read it, you don't want to assume that they understood the policies without any questions. Maybe highlight the 10 to 15 critical policies that you want them to know during their new employee orientation, and then again at every following training session. Okay, coming up to the end here, my highlighted recommendations are to schedule your reviews, whether that's going to be annual, every 2 years, or every 3 years. Decide whether you will have a professional or attorney review your handbook or whether it will be internally reviewed only. Do compare your policies to the new laws every year at a minimum. Change the language to clarify your policies based on questions that come from employees. So if your employees have questions, that means the policies aren't that clear and they probably need to be revised at the next writing. Do make sure that an 8th grader could read and understand the language in your policy manual. If it's too full of legalese, the policies might be too difficult to follow or too difficult to enforce. Do keep all of your previous versions of your handbook for reference for future litigation. Having a bad handbook is worse than having no handbook at all. Having no handbook at all gives you the flexibility, yet holds you accountable to the laws that you have posted in your lunchroom. A bad handbook, on the other hand, is like using a road map with all of the wrong turns highlighted. For growing companies, handbooks are essential. For informal companies with less than 10 employees, where there's a high level of trust, a handbook might not even be necessary. And that brings us to our new HR manual updates for 2026. There are no new, there are a few new laws for 2026. California does have some new laws. The equal employment, the EEOC is a federal law. the equal employment opportunities should be updated to include remote workers. So all of your EEOC language in your policy guide now should include remote workers. Harassment now needs to include unwelcome conduct in any form, such as through virtual meetings, email, chat platforms, or social media that creates a hostile or offensive work environment or interferes with an individual's job performance. So again, this goes back to the EEOC guideline for including remote workers as the possibility that they could be harassed themselves even though they're remote, or that they could be harassing others even though they're remote. So the remote workers need to be held to the same standards, and so the harassment clauses need to be updated to include remote workers. In California, the paid sick leave policy should be updated to cover crime-related proceedings. So right now, the sick leave policies have a number of reasons that constitute why employees might be able to take sick leave. All you have to do is add one more bullet point that covers crime-related proceedings. And personnel records is the last thing that needs to be updated, and this is California Senate Bill 513. Personnel records should be updated to cover education and training records. So you want to let your employees know that you are keeping education and training records, but also let them know how they can obtain those records on their behalf if they need to. So they're obviously, easiest one would be to ask their supervisor. I believe that's it for the new laws. So we're going to come to some questions now with just right on time. If you have to go, go. If you have questions,
Yes.
I'll stay.
So there was a couple of questions. I'm sorry, Deb. There was a questions, but since we're out of time, I have told each of them that I would address and get the answers from you and send it in an email directly to them. So we do appreciate everybody attending today's webinar presented by Heffernan. We will send the information by an email with instructions on how to access the copy of the presentation, as well as the recording will be available. Thank you, Deb, for your time and expertise today. We hope all of you found today's webinar to be a valuable use of your time. Be sure to join us on March 3rd. We have an employment law update webinar. Thank you all and have a great day. Thanks, Deb.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, everyone, for attending.